Hey, it's Teresa from Life Beyond Diabetes. And today, if you are in the US, you are probably surrounded by friends who are talking about how stressful life is right now. And you might be feeling some of that stress yourself. And you might be feeling that around the world as well. And I know that any of you who have been with me at all during this time of pandemic know that I've been talking a lot about the effects of stress on our body, and more specifically, the effects of stress on diabetes and insulin resistance, and how that can this time of stress can just absolutely wreak havoc on our diabetes. And I have to tell you, I thought I was coping pretty well with the stress, and I'm feeling pretty chill. None of the stress is affecting me in the last couple weeks. And then I looked at my blood glucose numbers that I hadn't been paying very close attention to on my continuous monitor, and noticing that they've been creeping higher and higher and higher and higher, to the point where my blood sugars were absolutely not under control. I had to increase my insulin. Now, again, if you've been with me from early pandemic times, you know that I had to increase my insulin early on in the pandemic as well due to stress. So I am taking so much more insulin than I have ever taken previously, and it's because my body is under so much stress. So what do we do with all of that? First of all, we do all the things we can to take care of our bodies, as far as make sure we're eating right, taking our medication, all the normal diabetes treatment stuff. But it just so happened that this past week, I also listened to an amazing podcast episode that I want to recommend by Dr. Brene Brown. So you may be familiar with her work. And I can't even describe how much she's a shame researcher, which kind of sounds scary if you haven't listened to her before. But she basically... I don't feel shame when I listen to her. I learn how to feel okay with who I am, and it does reduce my stress. But what this podcast specifically was about, and it was the October 14th episode, and I will put a link to this podcast episode in the comments so you can go directly to find it. It's so worthwhile. I learned so much about the body's response to stress and how it affects us. And I think it absolutely applies both to everybody in right now, as we're dealing with this huge time of stress, election and political upheaval, on top of pandemic and increasing pandemic. I know in some parts of the country and some parts of the world, people are going back into complete isolation again. Pretty stressful. So, so this podcast, it's Brene Brown's Unlocking Us podcast, episode from October 14th. And the title of it is Burnout and How to Complete the Stress Cycle. And she had two guests on. They're twin sisters, and they are Emily and Amelia Nagoski, and they have written a book called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. I have not read this book yet. I actually just got a call from the bookstore yesterday telling me that it is ready for me to pick up, because apparently so many people listened to the podcast that there was a waiting list for the book. So hopefully later this evening I'll swing by the bookstore and pick it up and start reading it. But what I learned, and I want you to go and listen to the podcasts, I think it was about half an hour, maybe a little bit longer, but it was so good. It was about how what happens to our bodies during stress, the things that I've talked about, how cortisol levels, when they're high, it affects our insulin resistance. They didn't speak specifically to insulin resistance, but they did talk about the other damage to our bodies that is caused by ongoing high levels of cortisol related to stress. And the missing piece that I got from this podcast that I had never heard before was talking about the stress cycle. And, I've talked a lot about how when we feel stress, and the hormones that happen for stress are a natural response. They're what used to happen to our ancestors that worked for them, that kept them alive. And so, on the podcast, they talked about the running from a tiger, or whatever the situation is, that you get that flood of adrenaline. And then they talked about and the adrenaline prepares you to either fight flee, or freeze. And we tend not to think about freeze as one of the ways that you can survive, but sometimes freezing is the right thing. But the part that we miss in our modern day culture is, so we've got that stress cycle, we're ready to fight or flight, and maybe freeze, but then we don't do anything with that stress. And this podcast talked about ways to complete the stress cycle and how to allow your body to heal so that you're not continually living in ongoing high levels of stress by completing the stress cycle. And I will tell you off the top of my head, I do not remember. There were at least 5 ways that they talked about. One of them was connecting with somebody and having a hug. And they specifically described a specific way to hug that research shows that it reduces your stress levels and improves the healing in your body. The thing that I've been doing a lot recently that really is working for me and that I absolutely see the results in my insulin, in my blood sugars, because again, I have my continuous monitor, so I have immediate feedback of what's happening with my blood sugar, is that I have been working out hard. I am not a hard workout kind of person. I am a go for a walk, take the dogs for a stroll, maybe go for enough of a walk that I get short of breath. What do they say? You can talk, but you can't sing. That's generally been my kind of exercise, my kind of activity. But I have to tell you, I have found so much relief from my own stress, and my blood sugar has absolutely responded to this. I think my cortisol levels are going down. It's improving my insulin resistance. While I'm working out, my blood sugar goes down and it goes back to a normal level where I want it to be. It's amazing. So I personally have been riding my exercise bike and going like crazy and working out really hard. Listen to this podcast. Get some tools. And I'm going to pick up the book. I'll tell you if I learn anything fantastic in this book. But I've harped on this a lot. Stress is killing all of us in many different ways, but with diabetes, it absolutely impacts our blood sugar and all the other negative things that go along with diabetes, hugely impacted by the evolutionary response of stress. Used to serve our ancestors well, does not serve us well today. So, having said all that, take care of yourself. Do something nice for yourself today. Part of that, I highly recommend go over and listen to Brene Brown and the sisters Nagoski and listen to what they have to say about completing the stress cycle so that you don't have to live in the stress cycle. Have a great day. I will see you next week at 2:30 Pacific on Thursday, as always. And I wish you well. Bye-bye.